Hello everyone, welcome to English Tutorials by Poonam Thakur. In this video, I'm going to discuss mind map, detailed explanation and poetic devices used in the poem A Photograph by Shirley Towson from class 11th English textbook Hornbill. So let's get started. A Photograph is written by an English poet, Shirley Towson, and is a tribute to her mother. The whole poem is woven around a photograph depicting the poet's mother and her cousins enjoying themselves at beachside family picnic. When she was alive, the mother would often look at the photograph and laugh. She is now no more. However, the photograph has survived. Now it makes the poet nostalgic about her mother, whose death has left a deep void in her life. Thus, the photograph plays a significant role in the poem. The poem is composed in blank verse. Its title is very much appropriate as it reminds the poet of her mother. A photograph is something that captures a certain moment of someone's life. The person might change in course of time, but the memories attached with the photograph are eternal. The poem, A Photograph, describes three stages or three different phases of life. In the first stage, poet describes the childhood photograph of her mother, which is a visual history of an event in the life of the poet. The photograph had captured a moment from the mother's childhood. The second stage takes us 20 or 30 years later. The mother would laugh at the way she and her cousins were dressed up for the beach holiday. In the third phase, the poet remembers her mother with a heavy heart. It dwells on the transience of life and poet coming to terms with the muting silence. The tone of the poem is that of sadness. There are various poetic devices used by the poet in the poem A Photograph. Very first line, she talks about cardboard, which is illusion. The cardboard presents an illusion. The cardboard with the photograph shows the transient state of the humans. Alliteration in stood still to smile, terribly transient, and silence silences. The repetition of consonant sounds. Transferred epithet in washed their terribly transient feet. Oxymoron in labored ease. Personification in its silence silences. Theme. The poem strongly hints at the eternal state of the natural being. Objects of nature like the sea, the river, the brooks, and the oceans are perennial and everlasting. But human life is too short in comparison. When death strikes, we humans are expected to accept the loneliness and the vacuum it creates. Let's read the poem first and try to understand the poem one stanza at a time. A photograph. The cardboard shows me how it was when the two girl cousins went peddling, each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she the big girl, some 12 years or so. All three stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with the camera. A sweet face, my mother's, that was before I was born. And the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. The poem, A Photograph, shows how time takes its toll on life. We try to capture moments from life which remains as pictures in our mind, some faint, some clear. What is finally left is the silence and death for the next generation to reflect upon. The title, A Photograph, is symbolic of such pleasurable moments in life, which leaves an indelible imprint on our mind, and past memories keep flashing back into our mind when we look at the photographs years later. Paraphrasing. The first stanza describes poet looking at the old photograph of her mother's. She says that The photograph shows her what and how the day had been like when her mother had gone peddling with two of her cousins. Her mother, some 12 years of age then, was the eldest of the three. Each one holding one of the poet's mother's hand, stood still, smiling through their hair to pose for the photograph that their uncle clicked with his camera. The camera had caught them smiling as the breeze ruffled their hair. The poet notices her mother's sweet face. It was before the poet was born. The sea, which seems to have changed little since that time, washed the small, tender feet of these girls. They all underwent changes while the sea stood still and seemed unaltered despite the passage of time. Let's focus on the word meanings and poetic devices used in the stanza 1. Transient. It means short in duration, brief or temporary. Paddling. Dabbling hands and feet in water, the act of playing in water. In the very first line of the poem, the cardboard shows me how it was, is an example of an illusion. An illusion is something that is said or written that is intent to make you think of a particular thing or person. It's an implied or indirect reference. An example of illusion in the poem is cardboard, which actually refers to the photograph. The cardboard with the photograph shows the transient state of the humans. Next poetic device used is alliteration. And students, what is alliteration? Alliteration is the occurrence of the same letter or consonant sound at the beginning of neighboring or closely connected words. The use of alliteration is quite noticeable in the poem. For example, all three stood still to smile through their hair. Here, the repetition of S sound and TH sound is clearly evident. Their terribly transient feet, and here the consonant sound T is repeated. Next we have transferred epithet. What is an epithet? An adjective or phrase expressing a quality or attribute regarded as characteristic of the person or thing mentioned. Terribly transient feat is a transferred epithet because it is actually a reference to human life which is transient and not one's feat. The poet uses the phrase terribly transient feat to highlight the temporary nature of human life. It refers to the human feat, but it is used to describe the lack of permanence of human life. The sea is constant and eternal, while the human feet, which are being washed away by the sea, are transient in nature. Stanza 2. Some 20, 30 years later, she would laugh at the snapshot. See Betty and Dolly, she would say, and look how they dressed us for the beach. The sea holiday was her past. Mine is her laughter, both wry with the labored ease of loss. Paraphrasing, the poet recalls how 20 or 30 years later her mother would look at the photograph, laughing nostalgically and remembering the past with amusement, how, as young girls, Dolly, Betty, and herself had been dressed for the beach. The poet reminiscences that the photograph and the memory of sea holiday was a thing of past for her mother, but for the poet, her mother's laughter is now a thing of past as she is no more. Both the moments of life have been permanently engraved in the poet's mind with the feeling of eternal loss. Let's discuss the poetic device used in the line, both wry with labored ease of loss. The poetic device oxymoron is used in the contradictory words labored ease. Labored means that which takes a lot of effort, and ease suggests effortlessness. These contradictory words have been used to describe the sad feelings of loss which comes by thinking of the past, which was beautiful and happy for both the poet and her mother. The poet and her mother had to struggle to show that their loss was easy to bear. Now, why does the poet refer to the laughter as wry? Mother had been out for a sea holiday years back and felt nostalgic about it, just as the poet felt when she relived the memories of her mother. Ironically, the memories in both the cases were beautiful. However, it was painful to recall the time that has so easily slipped away. Hence, her laughter was wry with a hint of sadness for the happy times that could not be brought back. Stanza 3. Now she has been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived, and of this circumstance there is nothing to say at all. Its silence silences. Paraphrasing, the poet concludes the poem on a melancholy note with the comment that there is nothing to say or comment upon this sad event. Her mother has been dead for almost 12 years now, and there's nothing that the poet can do about it. The girl in the photograph seems so far away, hence the reference to that girl. The poet feels at a loss of words to comment on her death. It is a solemn moment, and its silence makes her silent. The sadness of the situation seems to silence all other thoughts. Let's focus on the poetic devices used in the last line of the poem. Its silence silences. The use of alliteration is quite noticeable. The consonant sound S is repeated in the word silence silences. It's also a personification. The situation has been given the human quality of silence. It refers to the present situation of the poet, which has left her speechless. Her mother is dead, and she will not be able to hear her laugh again, and she has nothing to say about this situation. It's paradox. And what is paradox? It's a statement that seems self contradictory, but in reality expresses a possible truth. His silence refers to the complete absence of sound. The silence of the photograph mutes or silences the poet. Thank you for watching right till the end. So if you like the video, please hit the subscribe button and bell icon right next to it. And if you are happy with my presentation, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to give your valuable comments. Keep watching English tutorials by Poonam Thakur.